All right, hello and welcome to our webinar, How and Why to Test Almost Everything You Do to Your Website. I'm Ruby Brown, I'll be your host today. Before we get started, I want to mention that this webinar is being recorded and it will be made available on our website and on our YouTube channel once we're finished. In addition, if you have any questions, please feel free to type them into your question panel and we'll have time for a brief Q&A at the end of the webinar. So now I'd like to go ahead and introduce our presenter today, Jonny Longden. Jonny is the head of the conversion agency and consulting arm of Journey Further. Over the last 13 years, he has helped companies like Sky, Visa, and Nike put analytics and experimentation at the heart of their digital innovation. Joining Jonny today is one of SiteSpec's own optimization consultants, Luke Hardwick. So welcome, Jonny and Luke.
Thank you.
Hello.
Great. All right. Thank you very much, Ruby. Cool. Let's get into it. So, talking today about, as it says here, how and why you should test almost everything you do to your website. I say almost because obviously there are a lot of little things that you, in theory, can't test. However, I like to think that you can at least develop a body of learning that helps you inform everything that you do to your website. And that's what I want to talk to you about, how to do that and why you should do it. So just a brief introduction to me, first of all. As Ruby said, I've been in conversion optimization and digital analytics for about 13 years since conversion optimization was invented, really. And I've been both client side and agency side, working as a management consultant, helping big companies like Nike, Manchester United, and other big global companies like that, help them set up internal teams. And I've also been client side, so notably I set up a big in-house experimentation function at Sky, and now run a consultancy, Journey Further. So yeah, I guess like really all of my experience put together has helped me to form a picture of what experimentation can do when scaled effectively, and how that differs from what a lot of people refer to as conversion optimization, and that's what I'm going to talk to you about today. If you don't already, follow me on LinkedIn and Twitter, links are here. And here's Luke.
Hey guys. Yeah, so as Ruby said, I'm one of the consultants here at SiteSpect, working with lots of our customers over the last 5 years to help them get the most from the tool, including Jonny for a couple of years. So I've been in the space, the customer experience optimization space, for around 12 years or so now. Obviously helping to empower businesses to make robust decisions, data-driven decisions, and helping them sort of build out processes to achieve that through experimentation, through the use of analytics and personalization strategies. So yeah, looking forward to speaking to everyone today, sharing some ideas and insights. And again, obviously my details are there if anyone wishes to connect with me on LinkedIn. So yeah.
Right, thanks, Luke. So this really kind of a good starting point and a very bold statement here, which is that without experimentation, 90% of what you could do to anything you have digital could be a waste of money. Now that is not an anecdote per se. It's comes from a piece of factual data. There is a guy called Stefan Tomka who recently wrote a very good book called Experimentation Works. He's a professor at Harvard Business School, and he created a study where he took literally thousands and thousands of different tests that had been run on one of the big A/B testing platforms, and analysed them for all sorts of things to understand statistical things about them. But one of the key things that came out of that was that out of every 10 tests run across the entire platform, only one of them came up with a statistically significant and sample size significant result. And so that's a really, really important piece of data, because you can flip that around exactly like this. And the way to look at that is that, you know, actually all of that stuff that people were testing all seemed like a good idea. A lot of it would have come from research and data, but even so, only 1 out of 10 things worked. So if you're not testing, if you're just coming up with ideas and thinking, let's redesign that, let's change that little bit of copy, put a new image there, then 9 out of 10 of those things either makes no difference whatsoever to your website and therefore is a waste of time and money, or worse, it could actually damage your revenue. And so that is just really kind of the starting point for all of this. It's why ultimately you should try and test everything. And what we want to try and show you first of all today is some evidence of that. And what we've got here is between our clients, the agency that I run, and Luke's experience with SiteSpect, we've got various different examples which will try and show you how things that seem really, really obvious can produce really, really surprising results. And that should just help you understand why there's no such thing as a no-brainer when it comes to web development. So first one is, so I actually used to be the e-commerce director of this company at one point. De Vere is a group of hotels in the UK, country estate hotels like this. And there's a bit of a story behind this one. So when I started with the organisation, one of the first things that I noticed was that there were no review scores. So all of the hotels had really good TripAdvisor reviews, and it really just struck me that there were no review scores on the website. So this Trust You label that you see on the site here, this is not the execution of it. I just made this up like to try and show you it because I don't have the original execution. But anyway, this was something that we could do very easily because we had a partnership with Trust You, that are a reviews aggregator. And so I wanted to put that on there and test it. However, the brand director at the time was really dead against this for brand reasons and for sort of fairly few other kind of political reasons. And so we ended up in this kind of battle, really, of like, I wanted to do it, he didn't want to do it, and eventually he won. And through this process, I became so convinced that it was the right thing to do because of ultimately this kind of internal argument that I was having with this guy. And that is a really good example of confirmation bias. So I became convinced that was going to work because of that. He eventually left the business, and so then I was able to do it, and I tested it. And in fact, it reduced the conversion rate on the pages that we put it on by 20%. So it had a really detrimental impact on conversion rate. And I couldn't 100% tell you why. The theory that we had, which we couldn't necessarily prove, was that people would think, oh, well, I'll go and have a look at TripAdvisor. And so they were dropping off to go and have a look at TripAdvisor. The thing's not clickable, so you can't click to TripAdvisor or anything. But they would go to TripAdvisor and then maybe you've lost them to other people. But again, just a really good example of how you can become convinced of something for sort of emotional reasons that tell you it's going to work when actually that's not how it's going to work. So next one's for Luke.
Yeah, thanks, Jonny. Yeah, I guess this is in some ways a similar, I guess, theory or reason for the idea to come up. It's something that's come up a lot of times with tests I've run with lots of customers. Imagery is obviously a very, particularly model and lifestyle imagery is kind of a very regular topic of discussion for experimentation. And lots of brands and lots of people have strong opinions about it. And there's often a desire to change that imagery to try to be more aspiring. But a lot of the times what we've found when running tests like this and experiments is that this tends to appeal more to the brand and can be less helpful for the user, ultimately. It can be tricky to test. So, from a time and cost perspective, if you don't have the images available, and often your testing has to focus on a subset of categories, maybe one, maybe two, which may limit obviously volumes to those categories of users, which extends the runtime of the campaign, and there's opportunity costs associated with that. So too often we've seen with this sort of test where the result, as in this case, ends up being a flat conversion. So the effort to get the model shots and and the additional photography costs, etc., ends up not delivering what the business thought it would. And one of the other things that can often be forgotten in this sort of scenario is the fact that there is an additional cost associated with having a model or a lifestyle image, right? You know, there's additional costs for the model themselves, et cetera, which often doesn't get factored into the equation, and kind of means that in order for it to win, it has to actually produce quite a significant improvement over your product shots, for instance. So typically, I would say that, you know, multiple good product-focused images are usually more than adequate. But as a brand, if you're not sure, the thing is to use data and research and user feedback to justify even, you know, exploring that avenue of testing, whether it's worth investing that way.
Great. So this is a really surprising one. So this is a client of ours that it's an e-commerce website selling towels and bedding. And when we started working with this client, we ran a whole load of research from on-site pop-up surveys through to remote user testing and various sort of quite qualitative things like that. And the overwhelming thing that just screamed out of all that research was your cookie pop-ups and other pop-ups are really intrusive and annoying. And this on the top left is the control, and that's what happens when you land on the site. So there's a very big cookie notification, and the site is grayed out so that you cannot use it. And then once you click that, then there is another notification at the top which is asking you to accept push notifications. And so it's pretty obvious that, you know, on landing you have obscured the site, you've made the site unusable. And because of all this weight of research and data, we thought, you know, the obvious thing is to reduce the size of the cookie banner, make it so that you can use the site and get rid of the other notifications. So the top right is variant 1, where both of those things have been done. So the cookie notification is reduced. That's a single variable. The bottom left is only the push notification removed, and the bottom right is both of them. And really, I was expecting the cookie notification to have the greatest impact because that's what everybody complained about. I mean, literally, like, you know, from a Hotjar survey, about 40% of the comments were get rid of the cookies. The cookies are really annoying. Like, just everybody was saying that. But very, very surprisingly, the reduction of the cookie banner and the ungraying out of the site had a negative impact on conversion. So it actually reduced conversion by about 3%. Removing the push notification had a very positive impact on conversion. But it's very interesting because we were really, really expecting that to work. And in a lot of cases, I would say that a lot of people presented with that data would not even test that. They would just do it, right? And what's really interesting when you dig into the data afterwards is that actually, although people are more likely to navigate through the site, whereas before they couldn't, they are less likely to actually bother looking at the cookie options. And when you look into it, you can't really see here, but there is only one option, it's accept cookies. And when we did further research to dig into it, what we realized was that people were not bothered about the cookie notification per se. They were bothered because they were forced to accept it. And when they were then allowed to go through the site without doing either, they then felt like that cookies had been dropped anyway. And you've got to remember, people don't understand what cookies are. Nobody realizes what they are unless you work in the industry. So essentially, like, you know, by doing that, we'd effectively made the situation slightly worse. And what we're testing now is having a reject cookies and an accept cookies. But again, you know, just something that just seems so much of a no-brainer can have the opposite impact.
Another example, I'd say, where you know, people would suspect that a best practice is something you could just proceed with, you know, directly, is, I guess, displaying delivery countdown timers. So in this particular example, we've got a control on the left, and then we have a delivery countdown timer below adds basket, and then an alternative variant, a B variant of above the add to basket button. Now, countdown timers are a useful way to obviously install urgency into users' decision making. You know, users increasingly expect a quick turnaround on when they should receive orders. So these countdown timers make sense to help convey that and convey those cut-off points for orders for standard and next day delivery for users. It's useful information for them. But what we found is that this can go either way, as we've kind of been seeing with previous examples. Where the information is displayed and for how long during the day it's displayed will have a big influence on whether this approach is successful. How efficient the business is at fulfilling its orders and the types of products that are available, again, will have a big impact here. Because this is one example that we ran, and we also ran another one with another customer of ours at the same time, and they went in different directions for checkout conversion. Ultimately, very similar brands, very similar executions. And it's just a proof again that there's a lot of context around who you are and what you do that will impact, and who your users are will impact whether something will actually be successful. Which is why you can't just proceed ahead with a lot of this stuff.
Cool. It's quite a quick one here. Like this is pretty straightforward. So this is a client of ours that sell blinds, and there's a discount showing here. So there's a discount off the manufacturer's price. The manufacturer's price is struck through on the left. And so all we wanted to do was to think, should we show the saving as well as the manufacturer's price? It's just extra clarity about how much you're saving. If anything, you'd think like, well, that potentially might do nothing. But again, this had a detrimental impact on conversion. Why? As anybody's guess, I mean, sometimes with these things, like, you're also changing the layout slightly, you're pushing things down, that can be the case. But a lot of the time, there are just reasons that you may never get to the bottom of. And you can see the effect in the test, but you may never get to the bottom of exactly why. And again, that just shows that it is impossible for you to step outside of yourself and to really see how customers perceive things and see how customers are experiencing things in those split-second decisions that they're making. Again, all the more reason to test everything.
Yeah, example here I've got of additional payment options, which again, largely people would think was a good thing to proceed with, right? More options for users is better, covering all bases. Obviously, we've got one with just a pure checkout and one with a PayPal checkout option here. But it's risky to assume again that more options is better. In this result, we end up with a neutral conversion, even with PayPal being removed effectively. So getting that, and ultimately that's a good thing because there's alternative costs involved with transacting through other payment providers, right? Additional costs versus transacting directly. So if you can say conversion neutral and just focus on your own transaction method through the site directly, then ultimately that's a positive overall.
We've had a whole range of different results from testing payment options. Yeah. And it's really important to test payment options because we've even found that PayPal can reduce conversion, and the assumption is that it's to do with the demographics of the audience, where particularly for older age groups, that if you given the option, they may click PayPal. However, if they're infrequent users of PayPal, then they're going to end up in a password reset. They can't remember the password and all that kind of stuff.
Got lost out that way. Yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, the getting that mix right, it can take time, and there's a lot of considerations that will drive the right mix for your own site, right? As you said, there's lots of things that can have an impact here. The location of the user, obviously different payment methods across different European countries and North America. And so on. Device types, right, as well. Mobile, you would suspect maybe is more likely to benefit from some of these additional payment options where you don't have to remember card information, etc. And as you said, that demographics in terms of age. So even with a successful result though on this sort of thing, by even removing some of the payment options, it's something that should be regularly revisited, because obviously this changes over time. New payment methods get released, people's adoption of them changes, so it's not a static one answer and then you're gone, really.
Yeah. So this is a website, e-commerce website that we work with that sell gifts. And this is an interesting story because there are tons of gifts on the website, and what had actually happened was that they started producing video content that showcased the products. And through a piece of analysis, they had seen that anyone interacting with the video content converted at a much, much higher rate than people who didn't interact with the video content, and therefore decided to invest a lot more in producing video content. And so actually, when you looked at it though, my first reaction to that was, well, what if people who interact with video content are just more likely to be buying anyway, and so therefore their conversion rate is higher? So we wanted to get to the bottom of that, so we tested this, and the video content looked like this on the right with just this little link in the bottom, and the left hand side is without the video content. So we did that globally across the site wherever they had video content, and basically removed it to test it, and having the video content actually was worse. It reduced the conversion. And so again, really great example of confirmation bias, where through a piece of analysis that in a way was flawed, the perception had been created that video content was great, let's invest loads in video content, and actually it didn't have that effect. And sometimes the issue with things like that is particularly on slower machines and things like that. You know, somebody's clicking something to go to a piece of video content, and then they get a little bit stuck in a slightly jarring experience. Whereas otherwise, you know, they may have just kind of proceeded. So again, great example to test.
Yeah, and it kind of leads nicely onto this example as well, which is a product review example. I know we had one at the beginning around the De Vere Hotels estates, and actually the previous one just now with the videos. You know, like there's an argument, you know, you can make for, you know, people interacting with reviews and then purchasing will probably purchase a higher conversion rate, but what's the cause and effect? There are the people who are more engaged and more likely to purchase anyway, the ones who are, you know, interested in that content, as with the videos. So you know, it's a great way reviews are to generate have user generated content on the site, right? So you know, there's no reason not to not to investigate this, but you know, there's no guarantee that it will increase conversion, I guess is what I'm getting at. At a global level, you'll often find that it doesn't shift the needle quite as much or at all as if you expected it to. But there's a number of factors that can impact this, right? So coverage of products across the site. How many reviews do you have across those products? The volume of reviews per product is another one. The different product types and categories you have, and whether reviews are more valuable for certain types of products than others. The visibility of those reviews across the key kind of touch points across the user's journey. What's the quality of the reviews as well, and the content in them? You know, what are the questions and what are the responses and that sort of stuff? How do they kind of marry up with what users actually want and need? And then also authenticity is a big piece, and trust. So, you know, having a decent mix of goods and a few bad in there kind of gives weight to them in many respects. Often users will find it a bit suspect if everything is, you know, 5 stars or 100% across the boards. But what you tend to find, even if you don't see significance at a global level, when you're looking at the reviews, if you drill down by those different segments I've mentioned, you'll often find that there'll be more subsets or, you know, positive impact at lower levels down. And what that will allow you to do in some instances is kind of build out a profile for what works for products based on those segments, and then it will give you a plan to then actually, you know, help you move, you know, reviews in a positive direction across, you know, a larger range of products that you have, right? It's kind of replicating what number of minimum reviews do I need for products for it to be helpful? Where do I display them? You know, and what sort of questions should I be asking, et cetera, et cetera. So again, something that needs a bit of, I guess, even from an initial test, it probably needs a few iterations and a bit of digging into the actual subsets of users and how they behave before you can really truly realize the proper or the true benefit of those of that content.
This is a great one. So this is the same client that does the towels and bedding, actually. one of the overarching things that, the sort of elephant in the room of trying to sell stuff like that online is that people can't touch it and feel it. Like if you go into a department store and to buy towels, you can touch them, feel the quality, all that kind of stuff. That's a really important part of buying this stuff. And everything that we hear from research from customers is they're nervous because they can't touch colours, don't know what the quality's like. So we thought from that if we made it clearer that you can return the products easily, then that takes some of that risk away from the decision process that, if I don't like them, I can send them back. So we put this single bit of copy here that says free returns with Collect Plus on all orders, just above the product selector, and again, massively surprising, very detrimental impact on conversion there. We actually subsequently tested it again because if you're not in the UK, Collect Plus is a returns service, or delivery and returns service, where you can drop things off at a local convenience store or collect them from there, and other things like that. And we thought, I wonder if this is an older age range audience, they don't know what that is, and they think, like, I'm not going to have to take it to a depot or something like that. So we tested it again with and without that, just saying free returns, and exactly the same thing. So it's really baffling because, really there's only really sort of one option left in my mind, which is that people potentially assume that they can return it, and by telling them that they can return it, you're creating doubt in their mind as to, like, why would I want to return it? Like, what's wrong with it? Which you would never ever have thought before doing that. It's an innocuous, in a way, it's an innocuous little piece of copy. That's saying something. It's not saying anything new. You can get returns, but the fact it doesn't work, again, it'd be really easy to just put a piece of copy in your website through the CMS, thinking that seems like a good idea, but is it having a really bad impact on your conversion? And the last one is actually a really similar example to what Luke was just showing. This is a client of ours, again, another e-commerce website, High Street TV. We put simply, really the aim was the one on the right-hand side, which was to put the Trustpilot score, review score, under the header for a mobile landing. And that actually exists on the desktop header anyway. It just didn't exist on the mobile website, and we had tested it on the desktop, and it had a positive impact on desktop. And so in a way, it would have been very easy to go, well, it works on desktop, let's just do it on mobile. So we implemented it like this on mobile. The reason there's 3 is because we removed this black country selector at the top in order just to make room for it. So we wanted that, there was a variable that we were removing, so we wanted to test that as well as 2 variants. But the one without the black header did nothing. It was completely flat. The one with the Trustpilot review score had a negative impact. No idea why. It's not clickable. That would be kind of obvious if it was clickable, that perhaps people are clicking away and not coming back, but it isn't. But again, sometimes with these things, you wonder, do you create doubt where people think, well, you're telling me that, but maybe I should go and look for that myself, because do I believe you? You could just put that on your website, so I'm going to go and see. Whereas otherwise they would never have thought that. So there's things like that, that's a guess, but at the end of the day, again, test. So so that hopefully just gives you a kind of an overview in live examples of why you have to test everything, why you can't assume that anything is a no-brainer. Ultimately, what I believe about all this is that what people call CRO, which is effectively research, data, and experimentation, can ultimately fuel everything that you do. In every single bit of change that you want to make to your website can go through experimentation. But very, very few people do that. If they are doing CRO, typically it's referring to a bit of stuff and not everything. And this just initially will take you through a little bit of a story of CRO and why that it is like that. So, like I say, I actually ran my first test on a website in about 2000. 2007 or something, but and that's when A/B testing started. But prior to that, initially, you had a situation where companies would have a website and that was controlled by their IT team, and that literally the same IT team that you would get your laptop fixed with. And they had very sort of slow processes, requirements gathering, all this kind of stuff. There was no generally CMS or anything that anyone could use to change anything. So as a business owner, people had no control over their website whatsoever, and very, very slow processes to get anything done. Then, come 2007, as I say, A/B testing tools started to crop up that were JavaScript based, where you put a tag on the website and then you can change stuff on the website. And overshadowing really the fact that you could run tests was the fact that you could suddenly change stuff on the website without having to involve IT. So it suddenly was a kind of an epiphany in that, somebody in marketing or even without any real coding knowledge could at least change things and start to test things. And so after that, CRO sort of grew up as this discipline. It's never been really massive like some of the digital channels like PPC are, but it kind of developed as a sort of a hacking really. And the reason for that is that what effectively, really the word hacker means somebody on the outside, and that's exactly what it was. It's like somebody on the outside of IT cheating the system by tweaking content on the front end and getting more revenue out of it when they couldn't get IT to do that. But at the end of the day, IT still had this roadmap. So you've got a CRO person in marketing doing some little hacky front end tweaks, and then IT with this big roadmap with waterfall and all this kind of stuff just still going on of stuff that came from strategy meetings and stuff like that. And then eventually what happened from 2010 onwards is that digital became a fundamental part of people's businesses, and the web development moved out of IT to agencies and then in-house and agile and all that kind of stuff. So today you don't have that problem. You don't have the problem that people have no control over their websites. Sometimes they do a little bit, but it's nowhere near like it was. People have control. They have the ability to do stuff. They have budgets for web development. However, somebody forgot to tell CRO. CRO is still a kind of hacking. It's still dealt with in the same way. In that, you've got a CRO person, a CRO agency, a consultant or whatever, doing some stuff to the website, some bits of stuff, and then there's this other roadmap of stuff, and that all comes from strategy and stuff like that, and opinions and ideas and things like that. And that's ultimately why CRO is not experimentation. What people generally refer to as CRO, conversion optimization, is we've got this main canon of stuff that we're doing, this big roadmap, that's all happening. And then somebody over here is doing smaller stuff, tweaking stuff on the front end, they're testing stuff, and that's going into the same dev queue. And invariably what happens is that person or those people are fighting to get their stuff that's been proven in tests into the roadmap. And if what you mean by CRO is simply using data and insight to figure out what to do to your website and then testing it, then why are you doing anything not that? Why would you not do that with everything? So experimentation is really that. It's using research and data and testing to validate everything that goes into the production dev queue. And so really the difference is, go through this quite quickly, but CRO refers to simple front-end changes where experimentation is 100% of it is based on experimentation. CRO tends to be a kind of obsessed with finding winning things, like winning tests, because ultimately people view its value based on that. It's where's the winners? Where's the winners? It's almost sort of seen like a tactic or a marketing channel. In experimentation, that doesn't matter, because winning and losing tests are all learning opportunities, and it's all de-risking web development spend. In CRO, you tend to have improper statistics and measurements. People aren't really either don't understand it or deliberately do it wrong. And then, proper scaled experimentation, you've got a proper scientific method around test planning and things like that. CRO, as I say, is often a kind of a even if it's an internal team, it can be a little bit on the sidelines, and so it doesn't have really kind of structure and process. In an experimentation culture, you have rigorous process, which everybody's involved in. And then finally, CRO, because of the name, particularly conversion optimization, is really focused on conversion optimization. But when you get out of that and you have proper experimentation, you can improve profit everywhere. When the function that I built at Sky, we were optimizing customer service, customer experience, reducing calls into the contact center, improving advertising revenue in Sky Sports and Sky News, even the set-top box itself, all that sort of stuff. So experimentation can fuel a whole load of other stuff. So, but how do you do it? So, and I often get asked this, like, what I created at Sky and what's continued to grow after I didn't work there any longer, with the people that carried on after me, is a very, very progressive way of doing this. And I often get asked, like, how did you do that? So this is a kind of a high level of that. But the first thing is to not see it as conversion optimization, but to see it as what I would call data-driven web development. And ultimately, what you're doing is first coming up with strategy. So you're effectively improving the performance of your digital assets. So what does performance mean? What does that look like? How do you map profitability to the actions and the things that you can do with a website to improve it? What does improvement mean? Then once you get past that, what's the data that you need in order to be able to understand this? Have you got it? Like, is it configured and tagged in the right way? And once you get past that, then you're running a whole load of insight and analysis of different types in order to understand the problems that people are having, the opportunities to make things better. And that might be from, continuous voice of customer, listening to customers, to anomaly detection, looking for spikes in data, all sorts of things. And that ultimately allows you to come up with a series of hypotheses. And very importantly, this is where you feed in any of the demand. People often object to this and go, well, there's just things that we need to do, or senior people have these things that they just want to do. Well, that's fine. They're all ideas. But if you can get to the point where you quantify them and prioritize them in the same way as other ideas, then all ideas are valid and they should go into a prioritization system. And that ultimately means that you can do controlled testing. Testing is the best way to do it, but really it's a form of validation. There are also other ways of validating ideas. And that ultimately leads to the prioritization of a production queue in agile development, or however you're doing development. But that's the ultimate goal. And really the point of this slide is to show that there's a funnel process that sits before production web development, and nothing should go into production web development at all unless it somehow comes from this canon of learning that comes from experimentation. And people say we've got really big projects that we just need to do. Well, yeah, but really, some of those examples we showed you, they seemed like a good idea as well, but they weren't. So a big project, you can ladder up to it by testing small things first that tell you whether or not to bother in doing the bigger thing. So that's the whole point. And that strategy bit at the first part, there's different ways to do it, but this is what we call an e-commerce performance framework that is specifically for e-commerce websites. And the aim of this, I'm not going to go through this in detail for the sake of time, but the aim of this is ultimately to really try and map out customers' objectives through the journey, the metrics and measures that you're going to analyze in order to understand whether or not those things are working, and the things that you can optimize. And crucially here, you see things like brand comms and stuff like that. It doesn't have to be about the website. You're really organizing and structuring what it is that you are trying to improve through the process of data-driven insight and improvement. And then another really, really crucial part, people talk about a culture of experimentation, and you can find tons of blogs online that all talk about culture and in senior buy-in and things like that. Well, that's great, but if you don't have the actual mechanics of it sorted, and the processes and things like that, then that will never work. You know, both things are really important. But this is a tool that we've created that we call our operating system. It systematizes the whole process of going through research, data, prioritizing that research, prioritizing the ideas that come out of it, helping to plan the workflow of ideas and the gathering of information and design and UX and all this kind of stuff. And really the point of this is that it allows you to scale, because eventually you're going to want to have quite a lot of people involved in the process, like, you know, product owners, UX teams, analytics teams and things like that. And it will become very, very chaotic if there isn't someone or a group of people shepherding that process and making sure that it's all working along a path. And that's effectively what this is. I can't show you it in detail. Let me know, and if anybody wants to see it in more detail, I'm more than happy to.
The process is the less glamorous part of the process, right? Sometimes, but it's, as you said, Jonny, is integral to making sure everything's a success.
Yeah, absolutely.
As all the other parts.
You know, Booking.com are very famously, you know, very advanced in experimentation. And if you read anything about them, you will read that anybody in that company can run a test. Now, a lot of people's reaction to that would be, great, let's give everybody access to A/B testing tools. If you did that, that would be completely anarchic and disastrous. Like the only way that works is because they have got very careful processes and ways of working, and you know, centers of excellence doing different things and all that sort of stuff. Like, you know, to just suddenly give everybody access to that stuff would be a disaster. And so that comes from process, organization, stuff like that. So ultimately the building blocks of experimentation, and these are what, you know, to my mind, were the things that we succeeded with at Sky and beyond. You know, one, you have to have the right tools and technology, you know, particularly the A/B testing tool. What is the right one is a bespoke answer. There isn't, you know, it depends on the technology of your website and things like that, what you're trying to do, whether devs are going to be using it, whether you need people using a WYSIWYG editor, all that sort of stuff. Like, you know, that needs thought. Number two, skills and people. So, you know, particularly, I very, very rarely ever meet anybody who understands statistics for A/B testing. It's a kind of an unknown to a lot of people. They think they know, but they don't. So things like that. You know, who's doing user experience design? Have you got resource for devs and all that sort of stuff? Execution is an interesting point. So that there's, you know, something that very few people think about is like, what is the process for passing experimentation through to production web development? Like, how does the queuing system work? How does Agile work when you make it experimental? You know, that's not necessarily the same answer for every different company. Process is exactly what I showed you. That's really at the heart of it. And like, none of this can really come together if you don't have the right process. And then finally, like, you know, that is the bit that most people talk about, mindset and proof. Like, you know, the senior buy-in and stuff like that. And it's a chicken and egg thing, because, you know, you can't get senior buy-in without having something for them to buy into. And you can't necessarily have a fully formed capability without the senior buy-in. But you know, it's a gradual thing. You have to kind of get to the point of having something to show for people to, you know, to buy into, and cyclical kind of upward cycle like that. So yeah, and you know, this slide is here because we show people things like this, and they often think, well, this seems really complicated. It's got, like, you know, change management written all over it and like blah, blah, blah. And it's really not. Like, it's not that hard. It's just, you just have to know how to do it. You just have to have the experience, which is, you know, is where we help really. But it isn't as hard as people think. And it is massively, massively beneficial. So when the hotel company where I was ecom director, that I went there from Sky, and I, because I kind of controlled the whole thing, I ran the P&L for the website, digital marketing and everything. I thought, I wonder what happens if you apply this process to literally everything, which is what I did. And I increased the revenue of the business by about 40% in the first year, just by applying this really rigorous data-driven approach to it. Yeah, it's not that hard. So yeah, just before we move on to questions, like I said, we this is what we do. We help people with this. We help people understand how to scale experimentation, and we're an agency as well. So if you want to have a chat with me, by all means get in touch. My marketing team have put a clever QR code here that you could scan, but yeah, feel free to reach out. And as I say, get in touch on LinkedIn, or if you're interested in SiteSpect, of course, the email's here as well. Fantastic. So hopefully that leaves a decent amount of questions, unless, Luke, you want to add anything before we go on to questions?
No, that was good.
Great.
Great. Well, thank you so much for the great presentation. We do have some time for Q&A. So again, if you have questions, please go ahead and type them into that question and answer field. And we'll do our best to get to all of them. But first question here is, I see you do some form of research after a test to understand the why. And I know that is ideal. In a situation where there's a limited resource, what do you suggest is the best approach to go about this?
Yeah, it's interesting. So it's a very, very important part of the concept of experimentation, because fundamentally the whole thing is and should be about learning. Again, going back to that whole CRO experimentation thing, CRO, has this kind of notion with it of, here's a consultant who's going to come and give us some winning things, and we want them to tell us these winning cool things that we can do to the website. So it's very much about like, here's a change you can make, it's going to do this. But that misses the point of the scientific approach, really, because it should be about learning. Like, whether the test wins or loses, you should be learning something to then be able to implement that learning elsewhere. That's how you get the benefit out of it. If I run a test on a single piece of copy on a landing page, which is about the value prop, and it wins, then I've learned something about the value prop and about a better way of expressing the value prop. So how do I propagate that through other forms of marketing or other places on the website? So the hypothesis for a test should always be, I think this is going to do this because, and you're assuming why, you're trying to learn why. So it is really important that you do that somehow. Even if, like I say, with limited resources, even if it's a case of making some assumptions, if you can't really dig into the data, you can at least make assumptions, because remember, you're always going to still test what comes afterwards. Like, if you come to a conclusion about why something happened just from an assumption, and then you're running another test on the basis of it, then the fact that that assumption came from a test in the first place is a data-driven thing. Your interpretation of it is an interpretation, but it came from data. So I'd say, you don't have to get too hung up on having really rigorous post-test research, although it is absolutely ideal, as you say.
Yeah, I think that, just to add to that, Jonny, I think you're right. I mean, the ability to kind of drill down into segments, I think from the examples we showed, new versus returning, customer versus guest, device types, geos, traffic sources, will help you understand better how you achieved what you achieved and whether there's more to double down on. But one of the things that you also touched on, Jonny, was the fact that you want to structure a strong hypothesis, right? That we expect, by doing this, we expect to achieve this because we have seen this. So it's backed by some assumptions and by some data. And then as part of that process and planning of the campaign, you can sprinkle some additional metrics into your campaign beyond what might be pure conversion, which is obviously where you're hoping to shift the needle, that will give you some of that why. Might not give you everything, but it will help you have a stronger direction to take afterwards. And it doesn't have to be, hundreds of things. It can be a couple of well thought out. I think is about, trying to map that out in advance before you start will kind of yield more, as you said, learning, whether it's, from a positive or a negative result ultimately.
All right, our next question here is, at the beginning of the presentation, you mentioned that 90% of changes don't show lift. Where specifically does that number come from? Is it an aggregate look at all of the tests across your platform?
Yeah, like I said, if you read the book Experimentation Works by Stefan Tomka, he talks about the study that he did in that, and he is a really kind of leading figure in the field of experimentation. He analysed basically, I think, I can't remember the exact number, but it's in the tens or hundreds of thousands of tests run globally from Optimizely, and that was the outcome. So he would not just have been looking at statistical significance and things like that. He would have been looking at a potentially a more proper way of measuring the experimentation than might be given out of an A/B testing tool. So I imagine, but the study had other kind of really interesting findings, but that's where it came from. So yeah, it's a fairly factual thing, but also anybody who runs testing knows this. Anybody who's ever done any testing knows they don't need to be told it by fact, because when you've done testing, you know that invariably the things you think are going to work don't, and the things you think won't work will do. But at the end of the day, it's really, really hard to find things that aren't flat. I mean, for an agency like us, we're probably running at 3 or 4 out of 10, something like that, because we have such a rigorous data approach behind it. But that can sort of slip over time when you've sort of run out of like the really obvious ideas. So it is just something that anybody in experimentation knows intrinsically as well.
But then I guess to add to that as well, Jonny, as you get to that point, often you find the business will start to take more, after that success, start to take more of a release-driven approach to experimentation as well. Ultimately, I guess, and there are some there is some value obviously in the risk mitigation, factors that can also provide as well, I guess, for additional value.
Next question is, I'm under the impression that you need lots of traffic to test properly. If correct, is there a way to test a lower traffic website? It's a good question.
Yeah, absolutely. So in a way, like, you do need volume for A/B testing, but there are ways around that. Number one, you can be looser with the parameters that you set for the test. So a test design is really driven by the confidence that you're looking for, and that really dictates the sample size and things like that. Now, it is a kind of a common thing in CRO that a test has to be 95% significant. It doesn't. Like, for example, if you're making a change that costs you nothing to produce and would cost you nothing to implement if it won, then there isn't that much risk associated. There's obviously a slight risk that it's going to make the site worse, but your confidence that you can accept with that kind of a test can reasonably lower that. That's absolutely valid. So you can do that, and it does mean you really do need to understand the statistics, though. Because there is something else called statistical power, which you have to take into account, which I won't go into now. But understanding that properly is the first thing. The second thing is test upstream. So, mostly you want to test, this person hit this page, did they actually buy, or did they actually complete this final goal? Well, the amount of data that you need is dictated by that conversion rate. So if the actual conversion rate is 1.5%, you're going to need tons of volume. But if you test for click-through or something like that, just the upstream thing, then your amount of volume of data that you need is massively reduced. Now, it's not 100% perfect, obviously, because you don't know what they did after that. However, in that event that you have very low volume and you would have to run a test for years and years to actually test on conversion, then that is better than doing nothing. It's going to give you an indication. You can also use that approach to test various things so that you know what to bother testing properly, because you know that a test is going to run for quite a long time if your volume is low. So if you test that upstream model, then you can then take the things through that look positive from that to see whether they have an actual impact on conversion later, and you're not wasting time. So those are the two key ones.
Yeah, I think those are good points, Jonny. The one around maybe pivoting your main KPI for the campaign to a much shallower step, I guess, or a progress of success through the funnel is a good one. I guess the only other one that I would probably say when you're working with low volumes of traffic is other than maybe dialing down your significance level and changing your main KPI is potentially looking to be more bullish with what you're testing as well, right? If you're keeping the number of variations down, so maybe you only do a one alternative variation, and what you do change has to be quite a bold change. If it's visibly very different, then you're going to evoke or detect a signal much more strongly from users if it's very, very visibly different from control than if you are testing something very subtle, right? Which is going to take a lot more time and a lot more traffic because users might not necessarily see it as quickly and react to it as strongly. So I guess that's probably the third thing that you could potentially do. It's going to, whether that obviously shifts the needle positively or negatively, obviously it depends on the design and the execution and the planning that went into it. But bigger changes with lower traffic tend to give you a better chance of hitting a significance level that you're working to.
So we have time for probably one more question. I just want to let you know that we have a number of questions that we probably won't have time, or we won't have time to get to. So we will follow up after the webinar, and of course you can always reach out directly. We have time for one more now. There are some companies where the senior management expect an optimization team to grow revenue in a short time scale. How would you go about changing their mindset to understand that it's okay if tests are inconclusive or fail because it's about what you learn from them that counts?
Yeah, I think that's all about demonstrating that power of the learning, basically. So that again comes from this perception that people have of CRO, which is exactly as I described, by the sort of history of it and what it's become really. Like it's kind of seen as a tactical thing to generate revenue, and it's often budgeted alongside PPC and SEO and things like that, almost like a channel. And it really isn't like that at all. And like the way to change people's minds is to demonstrate the learning that you get from it. So particularly the kind of examples that we showed at the beginning of this, where there is a negative impact and what then happened, are really good ways of doing that. If you can say, look, that gets even better if those people were convinced of that as well. So if you're running a test where everyone thinks that that's a good idea and it doesn't work, and then you do something as a result of that which does work, then that really demonstrates that learning point of view. Like you literally concretely get to go. Especially
if that thing was something that someone was just going to push because it just seemed like the right thing to do. That kind of adds even more weight to it, doesn't it? And kind of shows the way you can, as you said, evolve that learning, Jonny, from something you've saved some money and risk, and then you've actually shown that in the next step we've added some value as well beyond just the money saving.
Absolutely.
All right, well, thank you so much again, Jonny, Luke, and the Journey Further team for joining us today. Thank you everyone for attending. Again, this is recorded and we will follow up shortly.
Great, thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, guys.